And here we see a bog witch in her natural habitat.
Hello guys, welcome to another video. In this one I'm going to be covering another of the new ascendancies in the upcoming Legacy of Phrecia Path of Exile 1 event. That's the Bog Shaman, or the Bog Witch as a lot of people have been calling it. So let's get straight into it, beginning with this top notable on the right here, Sanguine Power. Removes all energy shield, gain maximum life instead of maximum energy shield from equipped armor items, and -3 maximum life per level. So you may recognize that node there from the Apostate, which is a unique body armor. It's actually an Uber boss drop. It comes from Uber Cortex, which means we are immediately beginning there with an Uber modifier on one of the Ascendancy nodes, and it's a 2-point branch there as well, which is very interesting. And this is a very, very powerful modifier to have on an Ascendancy. So, gain maximum life instead of maximum energy shield from equipped armor items. What exactly does that mean? Well, the terminology armor here doesn't refer to defense, it actually refers to a specific gear type. It's talking about your helmet, body armor, gloves, boots, and shield items that you have equipped. And for those items, you're going to be gaining maximum life instead of the inherent energy shield on that piece of gear. Now, there's a really important distinction to be made here. It's only the inherent energy shield on the gear and not any energy shield that's coming from conditional modifiers. For example, this Twilight Regalia here has a bit of energy shield as an inherent modifier there. That will be scaled up by any kind of local increases you have to that energy shield. And this energy shield right here is going to be gained as maximum life instead of energy shield. But importantly, this modifier right here does not include conditional modifiers that grant energy shield. For example, the Ivory Tower, which grants energy shield based on reserved life. The energy shield gained from this modifier will not be gained as life. Only this part up here will be gained as life. And there's another few key differences there between the Apostate and the Bog Shaman Sanguine Power node there. First of all, this one here removes all energy shield. So this is much more like the Wildwood Ascendancy that we had before, which had this node. That also made you remove all energy shield, whereas the Apostate does not. Which means that with the Apostate, you can actually do some interesting things like using Corrupted Soul to gain energy shield, even though your actual gear pieces are no longer providing you with energy shield. You can still gain energy shield from your rings and jewelry and things like that, for example. But with this modifier right here, it is going to set your energy shield to 0. So you will not be able to get energy shield with this node spec. The other notable difference there is this -3 maximum life per level. Now, this might look like a downside on this node here compared to the Apostate, but it's not. -3 life per level is going to scale up to a lot of life, but you got to remember that the Apostate is a body armor slot, and the Apostate itself grants no energy shield or maximum life. The only life that you get from this body armor is that small amount that is gained from this strength roll. And with Sanguine Power, you're going to be able to use a crafted energy shield body armor. And the Twilight Regalia can go very high. This can easily go over 1000 energy shield with a well-crafted body armor, and that means you're going to be gaining over 1000 maximum life just from the body armor slot. That's more than a Calm's Heart would provide, and you still have the sockets, and you still have all of the Eldritch implicits, and you have the suffixes, and all of that good stuff. So immediately there, Sanguine Power, very, very strong life stacking node. So there's some interesting things you can actually use with Sanguine Power to kind of boost the effectiveness of that node there. The most obvious one is going to be Wrathpit's Globe, and this is a shield that provides a decent amount of energy shield there. That's obviously going to be gained as maximum life, as this is an equipped armor item. And you're also gaining an increased maximum life roll there as well, which is very nice. But importantly for this shield, and the reason why you're going to be using it, is because you gain increased spell critical strike chance and increased spell damage per 100 maximum life. And that is a huge amount of scaling that you can get from this shield slot in a life stacking build when you're using hit-based spells. Very, very powerful. It does sacrifice 10% of your life whenever you use or trigger a spell, so you need to be mindful of this modifier right here. There's also a few unique items that you can look at for earlier progression there. For example, with this Sanguine Power node here, you might want to stop off a few unique items before you actually move on to those very well crafted rares that will provide more life. For example, the Mask of the Spirit Drinker there is something you could consider. If you're in Trade League and you can get this at a cheap price, you may as well go for it, because this will provide a decent amount of energy shield and a maximum life roll there. The other modifiers here don't really matter, but the main thing is that you're gaining quite a big chunk of life from that item. You could also look at the Vertex, which is a very interesting item. It provides a huge amount of evasion and energy shield, so you're going to be gaining a lot of maximum life and a lot of evasion from that. There's also a good chaos resistance roll there, and you also have this +1 to the level of socketed gems, which is really nice to store your auras in there, for example. And then you can kind of look at the typical life stacking setups and what you want to kind of go for with the build. For example, if you want to make a Righteous Fire life stacker or something like that, you're going to be going more towards regeneration and stacking up a bunch of life with life regeneration. But if you're looking at a more kind of stock standard life stacker, you're going to be looking at things like Dissolution of the Flesh, for example. This is a unique jewel that comes from the Searing Exile. It's a rare drop. And this one also removes all of your energy shield, but of course it will already be gone from the node on the Bog Shaman. And this jewel provides a huge amount of more maximum life, but it comes at a cost. This jewel completely changes how damage interacts with your life, and you need to be very aware of exactly what this jewel does before you actually equip this item, because it's suddenly going to completely change your playstyle. Anytime you take damage, and that damage would cause life loss, that life loss is instead reserved as life reservation. It's only removed after a period of 2 seconds where you don't take any damage from any source. And this 2-second duration here cannot be modified by skill effect duration or anything like that. This is often used in life stacking builds because you can combine it with Eternal Youth, which is a keystone that grants life recharge instead of energy shield recharge. You can then combine that with Petrified Blood, which is a reservation skill that essentially makes it so that you cannot recover outside of a life flask above low life. Any damage that you take from hits while you're on low life will have some of that damage prevented, so you'll take some of the hit up front and the rest will be lost over time. The important interaction there between Petrified Blood, Eternal Youth and Dissolution of the Flesh is that you'll be considered to be on low life, but any damage that you actually take will be reserved beginning at the top of your life pool because of Dissolution of the Flesh. And until you actually reserve up to low life, so you actually begin to reserve into that pool of your actual life, Eternal Youth's recharge will not be prevented because you're not technically taking damage until you actually begin to eat into your actual life pool. And because of that, you'll be considered to be low life all the time, which means you can then make use of Pain Attunement to gain 30% more spell damage. And of course, if you're doing a life stacking build, you can always go completely... And of course, if you're doing a life stacking witch build, you can always go for something against the grain and go completely crazy. Perhaps you could do something with Bloodthirst support, which is a support, it's an attack support there that grants added physical damage with weapons based on 2% of your maximum life while you're on low life. So you'll be combining that once again with Petrified Blood, and then you'll be able to gain a huge amount of flat added physical damage with weapons, and you can think about combining that, for example, with something like Paradoxica or with Frost Breath, or in a strength stacking build you could look at Pillar of the Caged Gods. So straight away on the Bog Shaman, this is an extremely powerful node, and I expect that the majority of people playing this class are going to be going for Sanguine Power, and as a result of that, Wrathpith Globe is going to be a very expensive item in Trade League, especially early on. Moving on, we now have this cluster here, which is beginning with Toad Pact, which is minus 20% to all elemental resistances, 50% increased projectile speed, 50% increased area of effect, and 50% increased skill effect duration. That is a lot of stats there in terms of the amounts we see on nodes like this, but you are paying a big cost there in the minus 20% to all elemental resistances. This can't really be overlooked. That's quite a powerful downside there that you need to overcome. But this can be used for a variety of things. For example, if you're going for that life stacking RF build that we talked about earlier, the 50% increased area effect there is going to be really, really nice, and you're going to want the next node coming up as well. But one skill that I will mention there for Toad Pact is Winter Orb, because this gains a lot of benefit from every single one of those stats there, and it's one of the only skills in the game that does benefit from all of the stats. So that is something you could look at. This skill is a little bit weak at the moment, so to make it work, you're going to need some good gear, but that is something you could look into. There's also Blade Vortex there that really likes the area effect and the skill effect duration. Nice combination there. Now, after Toad Pact, you have Pandemic. So you're parting through Toad Pact just to get to this one because this is huge. 40% more damage over time, but you lose 5% of life per second if you have been hit recently. Now, one thing to mention about this is that it's not damage. Lose 5% of life per second if you have been hit recently is not considered to be damage. It cannot be mitigated in any way, and it will not cause any interaction as if you're taking damage. For example, it will not prevent life recharge from Eternal Youth. So that will continue to recharge, and that's a very important point to make there, because if you have that dissolution set up with Eternal Youth, this 5% here is not really going to do much of anything to you, because you're already recharging at least 33% of your life per second. So that's one way you can overcome that downside. In an RF setup though, you're going to have to overcome that downside the old-fashioned way and just stack a bunch of life regeneration. But you're going to be doing that anyway. You want to stack as much percentage-based life regeneration as possible that you can. So that's going to be a way that you're going to have to overcome that. But 40% more damage over time is really, really powerful. Now moving on, we first have Vile Imprecations here, which is nearby enemies have Malediction and 30% increased reservation efficiency of Curse Aura skills. Now Malediction is a very strong debuff there that is quite rare. It's quite hard to get a hold of that in any particular build, and this is going to be a nice node to grab here. Once again, it's a 2-point notable coming off the start, and it's going to make it so that enemies that are nearby you there have 10% reduced damage dealt, and they take 10% increased damage. So that's just a good all-rounder debuff there. There's also 30% increased reservation efficiency of Curse Aura skills. So this is any aura that you actually support with Blasphemy there and use it as a curse. You're going to essentially pay less to actually reserve that aura. This is going to be nice for something like Hexblast, for example, but it's just generally quite nice if you want to actually utilize this and play a more defensive setup with something like Temporal Chains, for example. It makes that a lot easier to actually slot that into your build and actually fit it into your build alongside the other things you want to reserve, like your auras. Now, coming off of this node here is two nodes, and they're both very, very similar. You first have Nightblood over on this side, which is skills gain a base life cost equal to 25% of base mana cost, and spells you cast yourself gain added physical damage equal to 80% of life cost if life cost is not higher than the maximum you could spend. So this is something very similar once again to the Wildwood Ascendancies that we had. We had something very similar to this where you would gain added damage based on your life cost. And something to mention here, of course, is life tap support, because this not only converts the full mana cost into life cost, but it also has a giant cost multiplier there, 300%. And you can even put this on skills that already have a life cost. For example, Reap, you can place this on there and it will still gain that cost multiplier, which allows you to spend a lot more life and therefore gain a lot more added damage from this node. There is also the Burden of Shadow staff there that needs to be mentioned. This is a very rare drop that comes from the King in the Mist, and this one already has Socketed Gems are supported by level 1 life tap, so you already get that 7 link set up there with life tap to ensure that you're already spending a lot of life. It does make you lose 500 life per second, so you need to overcome that. But spells deal added chaos damage equal to 15 to 20% of your maximum life. So you can find a skill there that's going to benefit from all of this added physical and chaos damage, and that's something you could look at there. Very, very nice once again in a life stacking setup. You know, you combine this with the life stacking from the first node, and you also look to increase your cost as much as possible with this node here to be able to deal a bunch of added damage. Over on this side, we have kind of the opposite there, which is more to do with mana cost. Your skills deal you 100% of mana spent on upfront skill mana costs as physical damage, and skills gain added chaos damage equal to 40% of mana cost if mana cost is not higher than the maximum you could spend. So Archmage support needs to be mentioned there, of course, for the large amount of added mana cost that one places on the spell that you're using. That's going to increase the mana cost, and therefore you gain more added damage based on the amount of mana you're actually spending. But one thing to note about this node here is that it actually deals damage to you, and this damage is going to count as a hit. So you can actually utilize this to do things like, for example, cast when damage taken setups, or any modifier that procs when you get hit. You can actually utilize this to proc that modifier and guarantee that it goes off. Next up we have Eerie Silence. Grants level 20 Pacify skill. Enemies pacified by you take 30% increased damage. So once again, another thing from the Affliction League there, which is the Pacify skill. This skill is actually available now in-game. It comes from one of those unique rings from Ritual, and the Pacify curse is actually a pretty strange curse. So it curses all targets in an area. It's not a mark or anything like that, and the curse actually does absolutely nothing for a while. It does nothing, in fact, for 60% of its duration, and then once 60% has expired, the remaining 40% of the duration, those targets will be unable to deal any damage. So this is actually extremely powerful defensively if you can time it right. So for example, this can be used to make bosses deal no damage with their huge slam abilities. Think about the Searing Exarch there, when he goes for the giant slam ability that covers almost the entire arena. That deals a massive amount of damage. Most characters cannot tank that. And if you time this correctly, that hit will deal nothing because Pacify is going to work there, making Exarch deal no damage. So that is something that you can look at there, some fun interactions with Pacify. But I think for the most part, you're not really going to be using that skill for this. You're going to be using it for the second line there, which is enemies pacified by you take 30% increased damage. That is a huge amount of increased damage taken on the enemy, and this is your curse being used, and this is also going to stack additively with Malediction, but keep in mind that that is your curse slot being used. We also have Fel Fen there, which is nearby enemies, chaos resistance is 0, and chaos resistance is 0, so that's your own chaos resistance. Now this one is actually really strange. Just today, we received information on the small nodes, so all of these small nodes here and what they will provide to each of these ascendancies. And here is the list of those small nodes. And you can see right here on the Bog Shaman, each of the small nodes will provide plus 7% to chaos resistance and 5% increased effect of your curses. Now, that is strange because this node right here sets your chaos resistance to 0. So every single one of those nodes that you take, in most builds that's going to be 4, is going to be doing nothing in terms of the chaos resistance gained from that node. So 28% chaos resistance that you gain from those small nodes will be doing nothing if you take Fel Fen. The other interesting thing there is that this sets nearby enemies' chaos resistance to 0. Now, for the most part, this can be looked at as skipping the use of Despair. At level 20, cursed enemies have minus 30 chaos resistance from Despair. And when you're using this on a pinnacle boss, that's going to lower their chaos resistance from 30 to 0, which is the same as this. However, the thing is, you're gaining a bunch of curse effects from these small nodes. You're gaining 20% in fact, which is going to bring that 30% up to 36. There is some synergy there with Fel Fen and Eerie Silence, of course, where you don't have to go out of your way to get an extra curse because you're already using this curse, and so if you're playing a chaos damage build or a poison build, it makes sense to set the enemy's chaos resistance to 0 if you're also using Eerie Silence, so that you can actually bypass getting an extra curse. But overall, I really do think that Fel Fen is one of the weakest notables. In fact, I think it is the weakest notable on this ascendancy, because of the fact that you are losing half of the power of your small nodes there, or potentially even more if you consider the trade-off there with taking Despair in a chaos damage build. Now lastly, we have Venom Drinker, which is 100% chance to be poisoned, plus 5% to all maximum resistances while poisoned, and you cannot be poisoned while there are at least 5 poisons on you. Now this is pretty strong here. Of course, you're going to be able to do some self-poison setups, and you can look at stacking that up with the same modifier over on Apep Supremacy or Apep Slumber. Apep Supremacy is the upgraded version of the shield there. It also provides plus 3%, so while you're poisoned, you'll have plus 8% to all maximum resistances with those two combined, which is extremely strong. This shield also makes poisons on you expire 50% slower, which means that you'll have a better uptime on actually self-poisoning or using the golden rule or anything like that. You'll have those modifiers actually up more often. And there's also the added benefit there of this line right here, which is you take chaos damage instead of physical damage from bleeding. Bleeding is typically a very dangerous debuff, especially for these types of builds on the top side of the tree that typically don't have a lot of additional physical damage reduction. So being able to take chaos damage instead of physical damage from bleeding is going to be really nice. It means you can mitigate it with your chaos resistance. There is also this protection mastery here. Damaging ailments cannot be inflicted on you while you already have one, and what will happen with that there is that once you actually inflict a poison on you, you won't be able to have anything else inflicted on you. No ignites, no additional poisons, no bleeding. Overall, this ascendancy is really strong. The Bog Shaman, the Witch ascendancy, very powerful. I think it's up there for me, probably top 5 in this list of 19 new ascendancies. What do you guys think of this one? Are you looking to play this on League launch perhaps? Let me know by commenting below. Thanks for watching this video, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.